Welcome to the Good Ideas Club.
Where big ideas spark even bigger conversations.
Season 2 of the Good Ideas Club starts right here, and we're opening with a heavyweight.
Tim Marshall isn't just a journalist. He's a war correspondent who's reported from the front lines of over 40 different countries, including the chaos of Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
He's also the best-selling author of Prisoners of Geography, the book that reshaped how we understand power, borders, and why nations act the way they do.
Over 3 million copies sold, translated into more than 30 different languages. It's taught in classrooms, think tanks, and defense departments around the world.
But today, he's taking us somewhere new.
Because the same forces that shaped our empires here on Earth
are now at play 200 miles above our heads.
And the next great geopolitical contest has already begun.
This is Tim Marshall.
And this is the Good Ideas Club.
Thank you so much, Tim, for joining the Good Ideas Club. It's an honor to have you on the show as one of my favorite authors. Thank you again. And can you start by just telling us a bit about yourself, please?
Firstly, thank you for the invitation. Tim Marshall used to be a journalist, foreign correspondent, and then I switched to long-form writing about 12 years ago. Happily, it seemed to go okay. Used all the 25 years in the field of foreign reporting to put it into long-form writing. From Leeds, if that matters, it does to me. It's a central part of my life. Football. Left school at 16, did bits and bobs, and blagged my way into journalism, which seemed like a good idea at the time. And yeah, it turned out okay.
And so, Prisoners of Geography, 2015, right? That wasn't your first book, though, was it?
No, that was my third. The first was Shadow Play, which is an account of the Kosovo War, because I spent pretty much the whole 3 months of the Kosovo War either in Belgrade or in Kosovo. And at first it only came out in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, but then was rewritten essentially and came out in English a few years later. But then there was the book I'm most proud of, Dirty Northern Bastards, which is a book about football chants, except it isn't really. It seeks to sort of understand the United Kingdom through football chants, partially. I mean, there's a whole chapter just on funny football chants. I'll give you an example. It's a bit toothist, but Luis Suarez at Liverpool had very prominent gnashers, and the chant was, "Your teeth are offside," which you can either think is insulting or just funny football humour. So there's a chapter like that. There's a chapter about some origins. I mean, Bristol Rovers have got a song that actually originated in the cotton fields of the United States, which is, I love stories like that, how they translate onto the terraces. But essentially, it looks at our views of each other through the terraces. Didn't sell that many, you'd be surprised to hear, but I'm very fond of it. So yeah, and then came Prisoners of Geography, and that's the one that sold.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love Prisoners of Geography, Power of Geography, and your latest Future of Geography. Read them all, and a huge fan and advocate. I think I've given my copies away because I want other people to read them as well. And then
No. We want them to buy them.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I shouldn't have said that. Maybe they've kept hold of them. I don't know. But it was really, really interesting for me. And it kind of like almost the opposite to that book about human chance, right? You're talking there about how physical features of the earth control and dictate so much of human activity. And I think your argument is that, each nation has its own geography. It doesn't decide that, albeit we could argue that those lines have been carved by humans in the first place. But let's assume that kind of countries have a boundary and the geography is fixed within that. And your latest book, which I really want to focus this podcast on, is how those principles might also apply to space. And how did you go from Earth to space? What was the kind of transition there?
Well, it was a natural progression, I'd say. Just going back to the concept of Prisoners of Geography, it's not that the prison necessarily stops you from doing things. It's just what you can do and what you can't do are within that prism of geography. And technology can certainly bend the bars of that prison. And I'm not a determinist by any means. I know that there's so many other factors that go into why stuff happens. But I just think that geography is one of the key elements of that. So if I take that concept that, a country with flat, deep rivers and a good climate can grow crops, move them around, and trade, and that influences what its history and what it can and can't do. You simply transfer that to space. And if on Earth, we have our rivalries and our cooperations and our race for resources, it's the same thing. And so it's one of those, blindingly obvious things the moment you realize it. And the moment I realized, well, yeah, of course. All the things that are happening here are happening there. The race for resources, the race for military supremacy, the divides we see here mirrored there, China, USA, and the blocks that line up behind them. And so it was sort of a natural progression.
I dusted off my notes, and a few features like Lagrange points, for example, which are, maybe you can explain the concept there. And it's almost like there's these geographical features in space that are
Yes.
key bits of areas for players to control, whether that's state, private. Maybe pad that out a bit and kind of talk about other maybe
Sure.
potential space geographical features.
I'll come to Lagrange points, and I think it's a reasonably good example, if a little literally distant. Let's take it as close as we can, which is the satellite belt. There's only about 10,000 satellites at the moment, say only. There's going to be about 30,000 by the end of the decade, notably through Starlink, but also the Chinese and others launching so many satellites, which is whole part and parcel of AI and tech and all the rest of it. Well, it is getting crowded. And so the geography of where you can put a satellite and the fact that that belt is about 200 miles wide and it's getting more and more crowded is important to understand. And it's important to understand that what that control of that geography gives you, which is, it's a whole bunch of things, including be able to see what happens on Earth. If you want to go up further, geosynchronous orbit. This is the orbit that if you put a satellite there, the satellite will then turn at the same speed as the Earth is turning, and therefore it's above the same piece of land, which of course is vital for a military intelligence. But again, that's one bit of geography of it, but another one is that you need a wider bandwidth signal coming down to Earth because you're so far up. And so if another satellite is quite close to you, you've got the problem that the bandwidth, so that the signals may interfere with each other. And therefore there's a limited amount of satellites you could put there. So that's geography, and who gets there first probably wins. All the way up to the moon. The geography of the moon is really interesting, where most of the minerals and the metals that we need for 21st century tech are almost all, it is thought, at the south lunar pole. And that's where the water is, which is why the great powers and some of the big companies are focusing on there. And famous places like the Sea of Tranquility, where the Americans landed, it has an amazing name and an amazing place in human history, but it's not going to be focused on. And then we'll get to the Lagrange points. These are points in space between two celestial bodies where, and this is not a particularly good scientific explanation, but at some point the gravity of one and the gravity of the other, there's a sweet spot in between them, whereas if you put your machine there, your space station, or eventually your space city, it will remain in the right place. Because if you just stick a space city out somewhere in space, it'll drift off, which is no good if you've gone back on holiday to Earth. When you get back, it's not there. So the Lagrange points are also these points in geography, in space geography. And it is where, for example, one of them is the James Webb Telescope is fixed on a Lagrange point so that it is always looking at the same place, because otherwise billions of dollars of technology would just drift off. So well, I'll give you a last one, and there are others. You can slingshot your way around a planet eventually. You would head up to Mars, and then if you're going to try and go further, if you do the route that takes you around Mars, you can then use the gravity of Mars to slingshot the spacecraft further on. So there's all sorts of geographical aspects which I think it's important to understand.
And bringing it back to the human side of things, so much of space travel and being in space goes against our ability to survive as a species. And at what point, do you think that constraint, our biological constraint, means that there's a ceiling to what we can actually achieve in space, and therefore that Earth will always be our kind of center of gravity?
Don't know about always, for the foreseeable future and probably a bit further on. There are so many constraints. I mean, one of the ones that doesn't get talked about enough is pregnancy. It's never happened in space. We don't know what the effects of living in zero gravity whilst pregnant would have on both the mother and the child. But also, even though if we are, I mean, we're talking a long way ahead now, 150, 200 years or whatever. If we had colonized Mars, for example, obviously you wouldn't be living in zero gravity. You'd be living in structures that had a form of gravity. But even so, you still don't know, and the effects of radiation as well. So that is one of many barriers to get past if we genuinely want to branch out and become an interplanetary species. But even in the shorter term, there's issues. We don't know the effects of 2 or 3 years in space, which is what it could take for a Mars mission. On your psychology, the effects of radiation, which we're still working on. I mean, the International Space Station is protected from radiation, but there are still issues that we don't understand. I mean, there are many other examples, but I've always argued that Musk's idea that you'll have 1 million people living on Mars by 2050, I think it was, is just absolute. I was going to say pie in the sky. It's a pie in space.
I mean, I'm intrigued on the pregnancy point. I'd never even thought about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I presume there's been some scientific rigor to that. Like, have people tried to conceive naturally in space? Have people tried IVF technologies?
Not as far as we know, and there are cameras everywhere, but not as far as we know. Yeah, but I mean, there's medical, not experiments, but thought going into this. It's just that, who the hell's going to risk it? No one, because, you don't know what you're actually doing. And so that, there's a lot of work. And that sort of stuff actually is a long way down the line. I mean, there are workarounds, you could have, I don't know, you go back to Earth to have children, and then you take them back up with you. I mean, but this is the stuff of movies. Although I would say that what we regard as science fiction frequently becomes science fact.
Yeah, there's an uncanny truth to science fiction, isn't there? But so do you think the most likely scenario is that some sort of robotics and AI do the majority of the working space for us, harvest materials and bring that back so we can sustain ourselves more comfortably on this planet? Sorry,
I think that's a more, there's two things going on there. One is practicality, and then there's the impossible romance of space, which speaks to the human spirit. We've been looking up towards the stars since we were sentient and wandering, and we've never stopped. And the very moment we could, we went. We didn't not go in the 16th century because we didn't care. We didn't go in the 16th century because we couldn't get there. And the moment we could develop the tech, we did. For a whole bunch of reasons, military, scientific, Cold War, supremacy, and all the rest of it. But there is that insatiable human curiosity to always want to know what is over there, what is up there. So, having dealt with the romantic side of it, then there's the practical side of it. But the reason I bring them both up is that, I agree with you. I think the practical side of it will triumph in that most of the stuff will be done by robotics. It's safer, it's probably more efficient, and certainly if you are going to have a settlement on Mars in, even a small one, 12 people or something in 30, 40, 50 years' time, by that time the robotics will be so advanced that they would do the heavy lifting, literally, and the advanced stuff before the humans arrive. But I believe no matter how good our tech and robotics become, I think we will still have the human factor. We will always seek also to put humans there. We will not rely just on robots. There's many reasons for that, including that you'd get more public attention with humans out there, which means the politicians would take more notice, which means you'd get more funding. But there's also, as I said, that sort of romantic, insatiable curiosity. So whilst it will be mostly robotics, we're going if we can.
I'd like to bring it a bit closer to home in the next one, which is what the future of geography looks like for Earth, because we've always been dominated by maps, both physically and psychologically. Humans are creatures of habit, and we've always created factions and wars and stuff like that. So what does the future of geography look like in a optimistic scenario, say global citizenship, and a realistic scenario, doomsday one?
Well, global citizenship, I don't think will happen. I mean, we can, and I do regard myself as a citizen of the globe and equal to all others, and all others equal to me. I mean, there is that sort of egalitarian side to it, but I think the trend at the moment is in the other direction. The trend at the moment is nationalism, which very naive people thought was going to go out of fashion based on about 30 years of history as opposed to 2,000 years of history. Sorry, but to come back to geography, which of course is related to nationalism. Well, it'll look different in the future, but the point is that geography will still be front and center. So I could give you a map in the 19th century, which importantly would focus on where the coal is, because where the coal was a major driver in and who could get it and use it, was a major driver in who would be powerful. And then in the next century, that would start to fade, and dominating this map of mine of resources would come where the oil and the gas is. And then I'll morph into a 21st century map, and I'll throw ahead to the entire century, and you would see where the coal is almost disappearing off the map, the oil and gas fading away, but where the cobalt, the lithium, the titanium, etc., that's what's going to appear on the map. So that's just an example of how, people talk about tech making geography less relevant, and it's just not true. It's just which bits have become more or less relevant.
So future of geography, future of tech, everyone knows, Silicon, Taiwan. What is the future of Taiwan?
Well, God willing, it's to be continue to be a vibrant democracy, a tech genius, and free. I mean, it's not a nation state yet because there's only about, I think it's been whittled down to about 9 countries that recognize it as a state now. Chinese are very successfully picking off countries diplomatically with large bags of money. I don't think they will be invaded this decade, but I think they will be so slowly squeezed by the Chinese in the air, on the sea, underneath the sea, diplomatically, you name it. The Chinese want to squeeze them. So it becomes so painful that they, in the Chinese mainland's vision of this return to the motherland, in fact, it's only ever been ruled from the mainland for about 10 years in the last few thousand years. So I think that's what's going to happen, this squeezing battle. And then you're asking to what extent will people support Taiwan? And that's a very much an open question. So at least 5 years, it'll be what it is at the moment. After that, I'm not sure.
I'll jump back in here. I'm going to kind of maybe not zoom out in terms of the wider conversation about space. But Tim, I remember the first time we met, you gave a presentation at the organization I worked for at the time about some kind of the future of conflict. And I think you spoke quite a lot about China. You spoke a lot about rising sea levels, migration. What are your thoughts on that now? Because let's assume that even if let's assume Musk achieves his aim of having 1 million people on Mars by 2050, that's still only a small percentage of humanity that's left here scrabbling around with the normal power plays that we, like you said, for thousands of years we've dealt with. What does that look like with rising sea levels, mass migration, the fact that state-on-state wars back on the cards now? Russia have proven that. I know certain authors, Yuval Noah Harari, didn't think that was possible given our evolution, but clearly everything has happened before and probably will happen again, right? What does it look like more close to home?
For the life of me, I don't know why people would have thought that state-on-state wars had ended. What are they? What's their template for this? What's their body of evidence for it? I mean, it's I don't say that because I want it to be true. It's like, I mean, the Europeans at the end of the last century honestly seemed to think that war in Europe was consigned to history.
I think the general argument is that globalization, and because everything's so interconnected economically now, that no one would risk doing it, because if you lost your position as a global power, you lose everything. I think that was the overarching assumption, that we're too connected.
Well,
globalization.
They clearly didn't know that. They clearly didn't read all the people in 1911, 1912 that were saying war between Germany and Britain was absolutely impossible given the trade links between them. It's just not true. And then Francis Fukuyama came along with the end of history, with the idea, and partially because of globalization, that liberal democracy had triumphed, and that was the template and the direction of humanity. But that didn't seem to factor in humans and their predilection for not always getting on with each other. So, sorry, I'll come back to your question, sorry. Well, globalization is a really important part of this because, the backlash against globalization is well underway. I'm surprised people didn't see it coming early. I mean, the first Trump presidency showed us the future because globalization did not work for everybody. It didn't work for you if you were a steel worker in Pennsylvania, for example. It didn't work for you if you were a minicab driver in the early 1990s in this country, and then people came over to work, and I'm not making a moral judgment here, and I don't blame people for moving and working, and undercut wages, and so you go and do something else. There's just thousands and thousands of examples, which, forgive me, I don't want to go bang on too much, but a liberal elite that doesn't live those lives has no idea of the effect on people's lives, and therefore they keep on getting surprised by stuff. Brexit, for example. And so that idea that nationalism is fading and global, we're all global citizens, is just, it's just the opposite of what's happening. So we're going to see more of that. And very unfortunately, because of the movement of peoples, I think it's going to get worse. And then this is where we reach climate change. Bangladesh is one of the best examples. Every year, the sea rushes up a bit further into the rivers, spills over the banks, salinates the arable land, which means you can't grow. And of course, you move. And more than 1 million people have moved into Assam state in India. And there's a lot of ethnic tensions there and violence between ethnicities because some of the Assamese don't like these people arriving. And when you put that onto a global scale, we're going to see, well, we're already seeing the effects. So climate change is going to have that effect in many, many places. People are going to keep moving. And again, I hasten to add, I don't blame them. And then look at the effect it's going to have on politics. If you think it's already affected our politics in Europe, you haven't seen anything yet, because that's what happens when there's large-scale, rapid change. And I think the key word there is rapid, how quickly this is happening. And how we hold on to our liberal democracies and our liberal values while simultaneously dealing with the challenges that we have is going to be one of the key things of our politics. France is, I think, the best example. 60% of the electorate in France now vote for what most of us in the UK would regard as extremist parties. 60%. The centre is the minority.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you talk to people from different sectors and industries, and everyone thinks there's some sort of tidal wave coming of change. And most people are focused on the AI tidal wave that's coming. And I don't want this show to be about AI per se, but one question I did have for you in terms of, which links to your connection of human control here, is we're outsourcing a lot of decisions to algorithms and AI, and we have been doing it for a while, even without the AI kind of marketing wrapper. But let's assume that a scenario in the future, at some point, let's say that governments make 70% of their decisions that are AI driven, and therefore kind of pure human decisions are kind of like left at that 30% mark, and we start scrabbling for power and control over that 30%. How does the world look like where we have less autonomy of our own decisions, whether we think we do or not? Like, we don't need to get into the technicalities of humans in the loop and all that sort of stuff, but how do you think AI is influencing human control, and how does that play into geopolitics?
I think you're right to bring up AI because it is absolutely central to what's going to be happening. Also, actually, to try and tie it back to the previous question, what happens when peak AI or when peak automation, which is connected to AI, meets peak migration? And if people are moving to better their lives in order to work, but then the work is vastly reducing because AI is not only making decisions, but is doing things, there's a real tension there, which I don't think people are asking that question. So I like your scenario. I'm interested in your scenario of 30% of decision making. Well, yeah, that would be the battleground of ideas. But also do remember that that, yeah, okay, 70% of decisions might be made by AI, but that decision still arrives in front of human eyes. This is what you should do. And the humans then still have the choice. Actually, you know what? This time we're not going to do it for whatever reason. So I'm hoping that the human element is still in there. There's so many really positive stuff about AI. Trying to think of some examples. It already can much better predict where a hurricane will make landfall, which seriously helps you get people out of the way of harm. The US Army, a Corps of Engineering, which is one of the biggest engineering companies, if you like, in the world. America's got, I think it's more navigable inland waterway than I think about the rest of the world put together. And they move, most goods move by water. 85% of all goods all over the world move by water. And they've already used AI Corps to predict exactly where stuff should be going down in the Mississippi River Basin, down to New Orleans, and exactly where to dredge to make it much more conducive to safe and quicker shipping. And they've saved huge sums of money. So that sort of engineering project, AI is already helping countries in Africa that want to link to each other with the absolutely best, safest, fastest, easiest trade routes. It's telling them, go there. So there's so many, and on things like that, but actually, yeah, I've just thought of an example there where you might actually say no. AI might tell you, bulldoze through this area, but a politician might see, oh, that goes through this urban area or whatever, or we'd have to move people, and I'm going to make the decision not to do that. I will pay extra to go round or whatever. So there's still going to be the human factor.
You could pad that out even more. Let's say there were two routes. One went through population A and one went through population B, and the politician had the ultimate decision. And if population A was a voter for the politician, even if that was the most difficult route, there's human elements at play there.
Yeah, but that, of course, we've always done that. It just wasn't based on AI information. It was based on other information. But yeah, we've always made those choices. Another one that particularly interests me, because of the moral aspect as well, although that, of course, that would be a bit of a moral choice, is AI choosing who to kill. Because the drones or the Bayraktars the Turks use have already got that ability. You program them, obviously. You don't just say kill whoever you want. You say, people dressed in blue or whatever. And they go up and they make those decisions. And they make those decisions many, many times faster than we can make those decisions, which is why the future of warfare will partially be dependent upon speed of decision making. And so AI will make those decisions. So yeah, it is a revolutionary time. Various bits of tech come along, and sometimes you don't even realize till years afterwards that arrived and it's had this effect. I think this is one that you can predict. It's revolutionary.
On conflict, I think you covered this in the book, and I think in your talk that I attended. One of the potential future stories for an escalation of conflict could be that a satellite gets hit by debris in space, and whoever the owner of that satellite is assumes that it's either a freak accident because there's so much debris in space right now, or that it was a malicious act by an enemy state. And therefore, I'd like you to kind of build on that. How does an escalation of conflict look to you in that scenario?
This is why one of the central arguments in future of geography is please get the space laws rewritten and agreed upon by the space powers, because they're so out of date. And there are many, many plans inside computers to arm satellites. The French have plans for bodyguard satellites. So and also to build on your scenario, if your satellite is creeping up behind my satellite and is coming, 2 months ago it was 10 miles below it, and now it's gone round orbit a few times and it's in the same orbit as me, and it's only X miles away. And what a coincidence, the satellite that I've got has got my nuclear early warning codes in it. What the hell is your satellite doing creeping up behind me? So, laws like that. And laws that, if we had them in place, we could then look at the evidence in your scenario of something's hit another satellite. What was it? And we'd be able, and because we don't have a global information sharing network where all the space powers are signed up to it, that everybody tells everybody else where everything is. So yeah, that would be a plausible scenario that you say it was debris, our info says you actually fired something at us, or you maneuvered your partially dead satellite into the path of mine, which is an act of war, essentially. I mean, we don't know, no one can agree where your vertical sovereignty begins and ends, and nobody really owns space, although they will. So we urgently need these new laws to come in, and they really are not fit for purpose. And there's so many other scenarios. If there was a proper full-on war between America and China over anything, that Taiwan is an example, one of the first things each side would try and hit would be each other's satellites to blind them. And again, if you suddenly get your satellites blinded, you're not sure what's happening. Is this an invasion here, or are they actually doing something else there? It's a new time and a new age with guidelines and laws. I mean, the whole concept of international law is whether such a thing even exists is debated. And they were written in the 1960s.
I mean, it sounds to me like your point earlier about the rise of nationalism spreading again isn't very helpful for some sort of global unity to create an agreed structure and a framework to prevent
Well,
these.
no, you can, because the Soviets and the Americans managed to get pretty firm agreements and understandings between them. Because when you realize the dangers, and as the 1950s went on and they got more and more nuclear weapons and realized what could happen if it went wrong, they felt they had to come to these agreements. So I do think that when enough pressure and understanding comes to the policymakers, I think that you can reach these frameworks of agreement, but it's that interim period which is dangerous.
But it's still built on the principle of mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, so actually on that as well, Dan, so you've got mutually assured destruction, and our capacity to just wipe each other out is growing exponentially, right? Whether it be through AI-armed systems, nukes, whatever it may be. And you coupling that with a rise in polarization in the political sphere. So what does that look like? And is this just the pendulum swinging? Is it going to come back to kind of conservative nature, or is it too late?
Well, yeah, I mean, history does, well, it's linear, but it helps us to better understand things if we think it goes in cycles or at least rhymes, even if it doesn't repeat. See, the reason, I mean, unfortunately, most of our discussion so far has been on things that are worrying, concerning, and negative. But there's so many other good things, and we've thankfully mentioned one or two things. But that's our story. That's our story going back as long ago as when we began to record it, which is why I'm actually relatively sanguine, because I find it sadly inevitable that we behave the way we do, and we will. And so, given that we've always done that, and there's no need to be particularly more upset and depressed now than in the past, I actually think this is a pretty fantastic time to be alive. If you look back through human history, and that includes for many, many people all over the world, even though, there are billions of stories of people not living as well as many other people, but there's never been a better time to be alive, and I think it's quite a hopeful time. So this has always been our condition. So when I look at what's happening in space, it's just part of that pattern. And a good example is the Artemis Accords, which is the American-led bloc that is going up and wants to have a base on the moon in the 20s. And most of the people in the Artemis Accords are the advanced industrialized democracies who have good relations with the United States on Earth. And then the Chinese are going up with a similar ambition, and their companies, to get the metals and to have a base. And lining up behind them, Russia, its junior partner now, Iran, Eritrea, North Korea, Nicaragua, the authoritarian states, which again just mirrors what's going on here. I mean, of course it would mirror what's going on in here. They're not going to be in competition here and then go up and suddenly, start hugging each other. It's the way things are, and it'll play out, and they'll probably have to come to an accommodation with each other.
How do you think humans would behave if we encountered some sort of alien life form? Would that galvanize us?
One of my really pathetic jokes is that the upside of intergalactic warfare is that at last we would finally stop thinking of each other as them and us, and we would all be us. because we would have another them.
Mm.
So that's the upside of intergalactical warfare. I mean, we're assuming it's hostile and not vegetarian, in which case, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's many a sci-fi film which is based on that premise. And I do particularly like Star Trek for that reason. The idea that you're American or Russian or whatever in Star Trek is just, so X centuries ago. Even the Klingons are our friends. We've got the, whoever they are, Romulans. We've got the Romulans to dislike now. But that's what would happen.
So I know we've got limited time and
all good. Yeah, no, I'm thoroughly enjoying digging myself deeper into holes.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a fantastic conversation so far. I'd like to then back to your point. I mean, Alex and I have been driving this, and it does tend to be a little bit negative as humans tend to focus on the negatives. Maybe end the show on the positives. Like, what are the things you want to talk about? What are the things we should be thinking about? What's good?
Over the last 80 years, because of the absolute catastrophic shock of World War II, as far as we know, the world's worst ever war with the highest death rate, the shock of it, we built things afterwards, concepts of internationalism, of universal human rights, of this is wrong, and it's spread across the world and has given a framework of how to try and behave, because we never had that before. You'd never get people in the Roman Empire saying we shouldn't kill them because they're humans. These concepts were alien. And so we have arrived after all these centuries of strife, at least with constructs and concepts, which personally I agree with most of them. And so we can hang on to those and we can defend them. I think that modern medical advances are they sound miraculous. They sound like sci-fi, some of them, just people 100 years ago. I certainly would rather go to the dentist now than 200 or 300 years ago. I think that the tech that's coming will help us enormously, and I think it will help us to alleviate the problems that climate change is bringing us. And I think we will end up somehow with clean energy, one way or another, because AI will help us on clean energy. And so, although I am angry... Sorry, say again.
Helium-3, according to your book.
Well, yes, that's
rabbit hole.
Helium-3 is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Of course, you never reach the end of the rainbow, and reaching nuclear fusion is something that at the moment remains a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But at least we know scientifically it is possible. We just need to work on actually doing it now. But solar energy, 24/7 from space. I just think that tech's going to solve a lot of our problems and give us one or two others, 'twas ever thus. I'll end with might sound negative, but it's not. Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. And that I like that saying, because we come up, with people howl there. Every generation, there's people say, oh God, it's awful, the sky is falling. And it doesn't fall. We have seen all this before, just in different ways. So, some people despair, the state of the world. But that's a story told by every generation. I think we're in a very, very bumpy period, and will be for many years, and it's going to be rough, and politics is going to be rough, and we are dividing. But, the Americans went through this in the 1930s. 50 years later, they went through it again in the 1970s. The National Guard came out and shot students dead at Kent State University. Bobby Kennedy was shot. Martin Luther King was shot. There were riots in Watts. Vietnam War was going on. God, it's all over. The sky is falling. And then they reinvented themselves again. And now we're back in that cycle in the States with their culture wars and all the things that are going. They'll dig themselves out of that again. Well, that's what we do as humans. We have peaks and troughs. And we're busy digging one at the moment. But we will get out the other end, because we always do. The sun also rises. I believe it will rise tomorrow. I'm basing that on quite a lot of evidence. I'm not 100% sure the sun will rise tomorrow, but based on what I've seen, it will.
Moving on to the close. Do you want to go first? Or I've got one.
Yeah, sure. Go for it, Dan.
Okay, should we invest in space, or should we be putting that money to solving problems on Earth? Just like a yes or no. Really
it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Alex?
Well, there's that. So my one is, if you could give every single world leader a single map or thought what would it be?
A map of thought, did you say?
No, a map, a thought or idea, a concept, any of that.
What if it was you and your family?
I've got one more question for you, slightly irrelevant, Tim. Well, not really, but I've got a hunch that we're all kind of just over-evolved cavemen in suits, and whether it's the top of the political sphere or just normal people, it's like I think we're all innately driven by just basic needs and desires, really, and that I think we may be overcomplicated, and that global politics is just that manifesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree with that insight, because when you can strip away stuff and realize that we are animals, we're human animals, and there's a massive difference between human animals and other animals. But when you remember that we are, and that some of that primal stuff is still in us, which we're working on, I think it's easier to map human behavior. Can I ask you one? And I don't think you know the answer. Beatles or Stones?
Oh, Stones, 100%.
I'm Beatles any day of the week.
You're both wrong. The
What
answer
is
is the Monkees. The answer is the Monkees. Okay.
Right.
Awesome.
Tim, let's wrap it up. And Alex, do you want to take in true INSO and the Good Ideas Club fashion? We end on
sure. So,
question from our previous
so
guest.
for some context, you're gonna have a question that gets passed on as well to the next guest. But for you, the current question is: what's been the defining moment in your life and why?
For my children.
We can slightly rephrase that actually and say, what has been the kind of most profound defining moment in all your work or biggest realization that you've had?
I'm a very vague believer. It's not a sort of deity with a beard or wings in the sky. I'm just a very vague believer. I have a sense that there is something. And, I'm not going to go and kill someone else because they believe in something else because of it. There's a lovely Judaic saying that if you're on one side of a stained glass window and the light is pouring through the stained glass window and in red and blue and green and purple and whatever, it don't make any difference if it's red or blue. The source of the light is the same. And I love that, because it means, I don't care if you call yourself this or this. So it's I know it's a bit sort of hippy-dippy, tree-huggy. I have no organized religion or anything. I just think, and have for about 30 years, there's something.
I'm with you on that, Tim. I'm with you on that. I feel like it's some sort of force like gravity or something that we just haven't acknowledged yet, or maybe we can't conceive. It's a power that sort of connects us all in some way. Maybe it's linked to some scientific proof about string theories and observer theories and why stuff happens and we can't explain it. It's some sort of force.
Fun. Yeah, because we can't know. We'll never know. But I just have it's just a feeling now. It's not a feeling about some airy fairy bloke with a beard in the, it's nothing to do with that. It's just a feeling. Now, a psychologist can probably come on and tell me, there's just this innate human requirement. But I don't think it is that, because, I've got no strong thoughts on life after death. I don't know. Let you know maybe one day. No, and I find it, I quite like that feeling. And there's a vague feeling of some sort of universal force of intelligence, whether it has a plan.
Amazing. Well, what a fantastic way to end the show. Thank you so much for your time. Incredible. I mean, I could stay on this call all day. I've got a list of questions longer than my arm. But thank you, Tim. I hope you enjoyed it. And
thank you both. That was fun. Thanks, guys.